Welcome everybody to our webinar on implementing and achieving measurable outcomes through culture and strategy. My name is Amanda Fajak and I'm an Executive Director from Walking the Talk, and we work with organisations all over the world specifically on culture. And I've personally spent more than 25 years walking alongside leaders on their culture transformation journey. And I'm really delighted to have here with us Cora Béghin from VP of Learning and Development at Sage Technology. And Cora's going to be sharing with us her story and Sage's story of culture transformation, and particularly going to be sharing with us a program that they've been working on that's kind of resulted in some quite significant changes within a 12-month period. Also joining us is John Keller, who is from the ZRG Technology Practice. John is a nominated Pulitzer Prize journalist and has done a lot of work placing C-suite executives and boards, and so will give us a really great perspective on the technology sector. And last but certainly not least is Bob Weiler, from founding partner of Brimstone Consulting, who specialise in strategy execution. And we're really lucky to have Bob and his very wise counsel on how you really bring strategy to life and measure that. So we'll be exploring all of that through our time together today. To just frame the session a little bit, we're talking about culture, and in our experience, a lot of people kind of can't quite get their hands around what do we mean by culture. So I just want to start with a definition of what we mean by culture. And we talk about culture as patterns of behaviour that are encouraged, discouraged, and tolerated by both people and systems over time. And we really love that definition of culture because it kind of tells you everything that you need to do in order to manage culture: what you encourage, what you discourage, the things you tolerate and you walk past set the standards in your organization. And it's created not only by the behaviors of people in your organization, but the decisions that you make around the systems and the processes inside your organization. We want to focus on two things today, and there are two big ideas we want to explore that kind of expand out culture and strategy. The first is the link between culture and strategy, and that they're intrinsically entwined. The first is that actually, whilst you have human beings that deliver your outcomes in your organization, the culture you have is critical for delivering the strategy that you aspire to. Secondly, there is no point having a strategy if it isn't kind of in service of something that you want to achieve as an organization. Otherwise, it becomes a really nice to have, and it's very difficult to galvanize your organization around that. The second big idea that we want to talk about today is focus, and the importance of focus for accelerating change. And Cora is really going to talk about some examples of this and how it's had a really big impact in Sage. And one question I continually get asked is, how quickly can we change our culture? And the answer to that is, it depends how focused you can get. The more you focus, the more you can accelerate. So we want to explore both of those, particularly as we spend our time with you today. So I'm going to kick us off. We have a Q&A part of the webinar, so please, as we're going through, if you have any questions, please pop them in the Q&A and we will come to them either during the course of the conversation, or we'll leave some time at the end to have a look at those. So John, I'm going to throw to you first, and I'm going to ask you a little bit about what current trends that you're seeing around culture, particularly in the tech sector.
Thanks, Amanda. I think it's important to see where the technology industry is right now, and what are the pressures and challenges for not only the suppliers, but also for their customers. And so you're seeing companies having to think of themselves as technology companies, their suppliers having to innovate, bring in new people, retain those people. You have companies trying to go into SaaS, software as a service. You have companies under pressure from cyber attacks. It's relentless. So they need talent. They need to attract talent. They need to attract developers. How do you retain those developers? How do you retain that talent that you're trying to attract? You do it with sustainable, powerful cultures. Because cash isn't king anymore with the inflation the way it's going, and equity is under pressure. It's got to depend on your culture.
Fantastic. So, Cora, I mean, Sage has actually always been very good at culture, and it's always been something that's really important, but you really have doubled down on it over the last few years. Do you want to talk a little bit about what kind of drove that and what that's meant for you?
Yeah, Amanda, you're absolutely right. Culture has always been a strength for Sage. And I actually remember when I joined 17 years ago, the reason why I joined over another organization that was making an offer as well is because of how the interviewer made me feel at that time. And that's really about the culture that they were driving through the interview. So to your point, John, culture is important to attract the talents that will make you succeed or not in your business. In the past 2 to 3 years, what happened is that we had a new CEO that was appointed, and Steve Hare is his name, and our CPO, Amanda Fajak, are very, very passionate about culture. And when he was appointed, he's been working with his executive team on looking at our strategy and how it needed to evolve to enable Sage to keep winning, and quickly realized that we couldn't evolve our strategy and making it successful without having the right culture. So as we've been, looking at evolving our strategy, we've looked at as well at how we needed to evolve our culture at the same time, so that we would make sure that we would have the right values and behaviors to support the delivery of that strategy. And we've actually seen that, care, that has been a really, really important part of our culture since the beginning, has been even more important throughout the pandemic, and how strong of a North Star that has been for us to keep doing the right thing for our customers and colleagues throughout the crisis. So I think a crisis is as well a good moment to test whether you have the right culture or not. And definitely for us, that highlighted the fact that we had strong assets as part of it, but also that we needed to evolve a few of them if we wanted for our strategy to be successful.
And I think that's really important. We did some research over the pandemic, and one of the key characteristics that kind of emerged as the most important thing was care. And it's one of those things that's actually staying as we move into the hybrid world. So Sage, you've managed to be well ahead of the curve on that one and leverage that really as an asset for you.
Yeah, I think that has been something that has been recognized by our colleagues as well in the surveys that we've done internally, but also called out on Glassdoor, because and not just because it was something important during the pandemic, but I think also because it's been core to our DNA for a long time. So they were pleased to see this recognized at that time as well.
So tell us a little bit more about some of the strategic drivers for you to focus on culture.
Yeah, I mean, John touched on a few of them. I mean, as many organizations, we're going through a big transformation, and we've been going through it for a while now. And as part of the shifts that we're trying to make, or that we've been trying to make for a few years, is that shift from on-premise to SaaS and now to digital, which require to have a bit of a more agile way of working, because change is almost a constant now to be able to evolve from on-premise to SaaS to digital. I think the other shift as well that was very important to us is making sure that we would evolve from being a product-led organization to being truly customer-centric. And what I mean by that is, really making sure that everyone in the organization, not just the customer-facing teams, would really be thinking about putting the customer front and center in everything they do and make their experience much better. The other element that we needed to address is making the most of our global scale. So Sage is an organization that have 12,000 colleagues across 20 plus countries, and we have customers all over the world. And we're acquiring companies as much as we go, from within. So it was important for us to make the most of all of this if we wanted to win in the market. And more recently, we've transformed our brand, which is another really strategic evolution for us. And we needed to make sure that as we evolve on all those fronts, we establish the right culture to be able to execute on those transformation, attract the right talents, to John's point, keep the right talents, and best serve our customers in the end, because this is why we're really here.
And I have to say, my observation is I think you've done it better than I've seen in most organizations, that alignment and that conscious thinking about how do all those pieces of strategy, brand, culture, customer experience, how does that all kind of add up and connect together? And I think the power of that is really starting to pay off for you in terms of the acceleration of your change and what you're able to do.
Yeah, thank you. I think it's been a bit overwhelming sometimes to try and address everything, but upon reflection, the fact that we've been really, really intentional in linking all those pieces really led us to the place we are today, which seems to be quite successful from our point of do and what our customers and colleagues are saying out there. Yes.
And the other thing I would say you've done very well is how you've engaged people around defining culture and creating the culture. So maybe it would be good to share a little bit about how you got clear on what that focus is.
Yeah. So I think what really was important for us and what made a difference is that we really started by listening to our colleagues. So it's not a third party that came in and told us, this is what your culture should be. It's not our leadership team that spent 2 days in a room or in an ivory tower and decided what our values should be. We went out to the entire organization and asked our colleagues, what is the type of organization that Sage is? What is our personality? What do you observe out there that is working well, not working so well? And what it is that we should adjust to actually being able to deliver on that strategy. So the fact that we listen to those colleagues, we've done this in 2019 when we had that change in CEO and CPO, as I've mentioned earlier. But we've done this again as well at the beginning of this calendar year, as we've been evolving again slightly our culture as our strategy evolves, as I've mentioned earlier. And the fact that we've done that listening, and that we then aligned with the leaders on the culture that we needed to support that strategy and our brand transformation more recently, really made sure that we were addressing the right things and that we were not missing anything important. But once you've got that, you've got so many things that you could be looking after, that what we did next is that we really made clear what it is that we're after. So what are our goals? What are the key behaviors that we need to address that will make the biggest difference? And we picked only a few of them to start with. And we did lots of educations on what are those values, what are those behaviors, and what are the ones that we're going to, pick first and address first. And we did lots of workshops and focus groups, and we asked the leaders to help us driving this as well, which was very powerful, so that it was not just led from the HR function. Everyone in the organization could see that it was an organizational topic. And I think what was important as well is that, and actually you help us thinking about this, is not just addressing the behaviors, but also making sure as well that it would be addressed in the way we work, in our processes. And so, for example, the performance management process, which is a people process that everyone touches at one point in their life in the organization, and for us several times during the year, we really made sure that it would reinforce the type of behaviors and values that we wanted to see embedded in the organization, and that we would assess people as much on what they do and how they do it to reinforce the importance of the culture and role modeling it in the organization. Yeah.
Okay, great. Bob, Cora's talking about being very clear on the strategy that they needed and how that kind of linked into kind of everything. What happens in your experience when organizations just aren't clear enough on their strategy? And, what are some of the things that cause them, not to be clear?
Yeah, thanks, Amanda. First, Cora, congratulations. As said, just listening, tremendous success. And I think both John hit it and Cora are hitting it. I'll come back and I'll answer what goes wrong. But certainly, connecting culture, Amanda, as you know, to strategy, it is the fuel that drives strategy. And without that fuel, then the strategy, Cora, as you were just nicely describing, people don't know how to act and behave to deliver the new strategy. Especially when you become a customer-facing, customer-centric organization, a very new set of behaviors and values you need. I think the biggest thing that we find that goes wrong is that first, people don't understand the market realities. John, you started to hit on some of those very clearly. The market reality that comes in now that every organization should pay attention to, especially when you're looking to build your workforce or build your talent, is the new talent is absolutely looking for culture. They are looking for who they want to work for, what the values are, what the behaviors. People are making choices, John, just as you were saying. So just the first of those to attract the right talent. Now, Cora, right where you headed, which was about retention and succession and last but not least, engagement. So if those are important to you, and everybody in the world right now, that's incredibly important. You are constantly looking at how do you build those, and you build those with the values and behaviors, Cora, you were just talking about, and I'm sure you're getting great results across the platform. So Amanda, I may not be answering it specifically, but when you are not focused on that, and in some point in your strategic plan, not the growth part of strategy, which is what we find people always wanting to spend time on, and we agree with it, that's an important part of it. And you have to have that growth plan part of it. And a lot of people now, obviously, as we charge into this world of high inflation, how you're going to become more efficient. But if you don't have the culture that supports it, and you're not thinking about that part of the strategic plan, that's going to be a problem. And you may not see it in the very beginning, but it'll start to become a major issue because it'll pop out in retention, and you'll see it. And probably, Cora, as you saw at one point when you stepped in, that was probably higher than you would have liked it to be. And now when you engage the organization around culture, so that whole engagement of what should it be, what are those values and behaviors we need to become a customer-centric or customer-focused organization. So did that get close enough to what you were asking? Or
No, that's great, Bob. Thank you. And I think the flip side is, where we find companies that are not clear enough on their strategy, where they haven't really kind of got that focus, is it about kind of the customer? Is it about market share? Is it becoming a SaaS business? Where they haven't yet kind of landed on what they're doing. The danger is when they do work on the culture, it can be quite kind of broad, and you don't get enough clarity and focus in terms of what you need to do and how you kind of galvanize the organization, which, Cora, I guess brings me to kind of ask you talked about, you got clear on a few key behaviors that you felt were really important. And, we talk about accountability and transparency were identified as key, with some really kind of tangible business drivers underpinning that. Do you want to just talk a little bit about kind of how you identified those and kind of what they meant in the story?
Yes, absolutely. So I think, when I, a couple of years ago, started to look at, our culture transformation and what was needed, I wasn't sure where to start, to be honest, because there's so much that you can go after. So after understanding, how that would need to connect to the strategy, I actually went to talk to the leaders and to understand what was needed to make the transformation work. And again, what would be those key behaviors that we would need to see shifting for us to be even more successful out there. And after talking to them, a few tangible, outcomes came out from those discussions that led us to think that we needed much greater accountability in the organization and much greater transparency. And if we were able to crack those two things, that would then enable us to be much more agile in the way we work. And what I mean by agile is, seeing a much greater pace and coordination across the organization. Again, we're 12,000 colleagues across 20 different countries with silos and matrix, which can be very powerful if you know how to make that work. So we needed as well to make sure that, people would know how to make the matrix work and have much more clarity as well on what needed to be delivered and when, and that everyone would participate to the efforts. And that everyone would be clear on what they needed to do. So we were really attracted to the idea of a culture based on accountability and transparent relationships, and that would drive much more clarity, much more empowerment, better contracting between the teams, and who would be doing what and what those handshakes needed to be, and trusting everyone that they would be doing their job. And that's even more important today as we're evolving our operating model even further, as we introduce squads, or some would talk about project teams, and so really having that clarity of this is what I need from you, this is what you need from me, this is when we'll be able to deliver that, and having that pace and trust is really what we needed to address, and make sure that we would not drive everything with processes and rules, but much more like with the right behaviors across the organization. And this supported by having much more direct conversations was really what we identified as needed to be addressed. So much more accountability, much more, directness or transparency in the way we work.
John, when you listen to Cora, I'm curious, does what she's talking about in terms of pace, agility kind of resonate? Yeah. Does it kind of match what you're seeing other organizations grappling with?
Absolutely. Engineers, the top engineers are going to go somewhere where they know that there's an agile atmosphere, where they're not going to be burdened by a lot of bureaucracy. They want to create, they want to solve problems, as an example, right? Hearing what Cora and Bob have been saying, this takes a lot of work to instill this, to make it 24/7 for an employee, for the people and the managers, the people that go home, carry that culture with them. They carry it in their minds. It makes them want to wear the t-shirt all the time, right? So it takes elbow grease, and you have to sweat it at all levels to make it happen. So I would just like to know, when I see something on the website like Be Sage, Cora, what does that mean to be sage? I can kind of think about what it probably means, but it tells me that it's part of your communications on the culture, right? And also it extends to your customers. If you're being sage, hey, I'm a customer, I'm being sage too, right? So how does that all link together?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And part of the work that we've done recently with the transformation of our brand was actually to make sure that we would connect greater, that external and internal brand, and that rallying cry would be the same whether we're talking to a customer or we're talking to a colleague internally, right?
Cora, can I pick up on the point that John raised about accountability and agility? Because we had quite a few conversations about this internally in Sage, because some people see them as at odds with each other. What's your where have you landed on how they align together?
Yes, I think, if you want to be able to create agility in your organization, then you need absolute clarity on who's accountable for what to start with. And you need people to take accountability for delivering what they say they would be doing, or calling out when stuff are happening that are not happening in the right way. I mean, you mentioned at the beginning in the definition of culture that you have, it's about as much about, supporting what the right things are, but also not tolerating what shouldn't be. And I think that's the hardest part, to be honest, is, where do you draw the line in what you tolerate, you do not tolerate, and how do you call out those moments where, the right things are not happening and people need to take accountability to make that happen. But this is one of the elements that we're trying to crack as well, is how do we make sure that we create agility through greater accountability in the organization.
Yeah, and we certainly, our experience is that the more somebody's reliable, the more it builds trust, the more it gives freedom for action. And it's that kind of cycle that you're really trying to kind of create through the accountability kind of work, where you've really started, and the transparency to have that open conversation. Yes. So you kind of know that kind of people are kind of saying what's on their mind.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So just a reminder to everyone on questions. We've got one come in, which I have noted we'll come back to later, but please pop in your questions into the Q&A and we will come to them. So Cora, just kind of getting a little bit practical about some of the shifts that you've made. What do you think has made the biggest difference? I think people will probably be really interested to hear kind of what you did and how you did it.
So I think, I mentioned it earlier, but we really focused on a few things. And we've been very clear from the beginning on what it is that we wanted to see shifting, because it's difficult. It's hard to measure culture. It's hard to measure culture shift. It's harder if you're not clear on what we're trying to shift, obviously, right? So, but part of what we've been doing is that making sure that our leaders were really bought into the culture that we're trying to create and how we would do that, so that they could help us doing this along the journey. Looking at that focus on creating an accountable and transparent culture, part of what we've done is running out a program to our top 350 leaders in the organization. So that represents between 35 and 40 teams across the globe. And we took them through a number of sessions where we were teaching them different, techniques, language that would help creating an accountable and transparent environment in the organization. And we've had them working on a number of, business challenges that they had. So we had a leader with his or her intact team thinking about those things that they couldn't really, execute at the pace that they needed to see executed, or they couldn't really rely around them, the stakeholders that they needed to make that happen. And using those techniques and tips that we were teaching throughout the program helped them thinking about how they could approach that differently. And we've done that over a period of 3 months for each team. And I think overall the program took us between 6 to 9 months to take all of the teams through it. And we've done most of it virtually, as you can imagine, in the current environment. And that program associated to a number of, education sessions, as I've mentioned earlier. Our CEO that has really been a driving force in helping establishing the right culture, our CPO as well, really helped us shifting a number of behaviors across the organization. This webinar is about measurements. As we've gone through that program, we've been able to measure a number of those shifts, and the results are really, really positive. So we're really happy about this. And one of the elements that we're really happy with is that now that we've taken the leaders through this program, they've been coming to us and asking to roll that out to the broader organization, which is a sign of success, right, in itself. So we're now taking this to the broader organization as well.
And Cora, would you be comfortable sharing some of those measures of success? Because I think actually how you measure culture often people aren't really that clear on. So
yes, so we've been going back and forth with my team and your team, Amanda, on how it is that we measure culture. So they are the usual KPIs, I would say, that you would go after, such as if you run colleague surveys, you would look at the ENPS or ESAT or any comments that you have in your colleague survey. We look at Glassdoor as well, any reviews that we have on Glassdoor comparably. We look at our customer feedback as well, and if there are any indication in there of how our own teams are behaving, and that we would need to look at. But we've also been very specific with that program that I talked about earlier to measure the shift on those behaviors that we wanted to see changing. So, what we've done is that we've listed a number of behaviors, we've done pre and post assessments, and the teams would go through this pre-assessment before the program, at the end of the program, and we'll run another one soon, because it's been a few months now that they've done it, to see how this is changing and impacting the organization. So, and we've actually seen quite a positive shift on those behaviors, because all of them have improved so far between before the program and where we are now, at the exception of one that we're looking after right now. But this is really good. We're really happy about this. The other thing that we've been looking at is in the sessions that we've been running, we've been asking the teams to think about how much time they think they're wasting because of low accountability in the organization. And so they've been thinking and declaring a time. And so we've been measuring this as well as part of the post-assessment surveys. And we see that after having done the program, the time that they're wasting to cover for low accountability in the organization has significantly reduced. So it has decreased by 14 points. And if you translate that into salary costs, having in mind that these are the leaders in the organization, it's quite significant, pounds that we're talking about, right? The other element that we've been looking at is, all of those stories that we're hearing, because they've been working on those business challenges in the program. We've sort of tracked as well a few of them and looked at how they've been evolving. And, most of those business challenges seems to be in a much better place right now. So it's quite interesting to see. Now, it took us a bit of time to reach that sort of practicality in the measures, because we went as far as, oh, let's use that program and see the impact that it can have on the revenue progression or the NPS, so the customer satisfaction. I think at that point we went a bit too far.